In Judaism and Christianity, the concept of the Jubilee is a special year of remission of sins and universal pardon. In the biblical book of Leviticus, a Jubilee year is mentioned to occur every 25th year, in which slaves and prisoners would be freed, debts would be forgiven and the mercies of God would be particularly manifest. In the Bible, Leviticus chapter 25 verses 8 to 13 states, "And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the jubile to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubile unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubile shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the jubile, it shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of this jubile ye shall return every man unto his possession." In Judaism, the Jubilee year is not observed in modern times because it only applies when representatives of all 12 tribes have returned to Israel, and a majority of the world's Jews live in the land. In Christianity, the tradition dates to 1300, when Pope Boniface VIII convoked a holy year, following which ordinary jubilees have generally been celebrated every 25 or 50 years, with extraordinary jubilees in addition depending on need. Christian jubilees, particularly in the Catholic tradition, generally involve pilgrimage to a sacred site, normally the city of Rome. The Catholic Church has declared the Extraordinary Jubilee of Mercy for 2015-2016. Prehistory of the Christian Jubilee. The Year of Jubilee in both the Jewish and Christian traditions is a time of joy, the year of remission or universal pardon. In Mosaic law, each 50th year was to be celebrated as a Jubilee year, and that at this season every household should recover its absent members, the land return to its former owners, the Hebrew slaves be set free, and debts be remitted. The same conception, spiritualized, forms the fundamental idea of the Christian Jubilee, though it is difficult to judge how far of a sort of continuity can have existed between the two. It is commonly stated that Pope Boniface VIII instituted the first Christian Jubilee in the year 1300, and it is certain that this is the first celebration of which we have any precise record. But it is also certain that the idea of solemnizing a 50th anniversary was familiar to medieval writers, no doubt through their knowledge of the Bible, long before that date. The Jubilee of a monk's religious profession was often kept, and probably some vague memory survived of those Roman ludi seculares which are commemorated in the Carmen Seculari of Horace, even though this last was commonly associated with a period of 100 years rather than any lesser interval. But, what is most noteworthy, the number 50 was specially associated in the early 13th century with the idea of remission. The translation of the body of St. Thomas of Canterbury took place in the year 1220, 50 years after his martyrdom. The sermon on that occasion was preached by Cardinal Stephen Lantron, who told his hearers that this coincidence was meant by Providence to recall the mystical virtue of the number 50, which, as every reader of the sacred page is aware, is the number of remission. We might be tempted to regard this discourse as a fabrication of later date, were it not for the fact that a Latin hymn directed against the Albigenses, and certainly belonging to the early 13th century, speaks in exactly similar terms. The first stanza runs thus: Anni favor jubilee penorum laxit debitum, post peccatorum vomitum me cessandi propositum. Current passum omnis rei, pro merced regnum Dei levi part et expositum. In the light of this explicit mention of a jubilee with great remissions of the penalties of sin to be obtained by full confession and purposive amendment, it seems difficult to reject the statement of Cardinal Giacomo Stefaneschi, the contemporary and counsellor of Pope Boniface VIII, and author of a treatise on the First Jubilee, that the proclamation of the Jubilee owed its origin to the statements of certain aged pilgrims who persuaded Boniface that great indulgences had been granted to all pilgrims in Rome about 100 years before. It is also noteworthy that in the Chronicle of Alberic of Three Fountains, under the year 1208, we find this brief entry. It is said that this year was celebrated as the 50th year, or the Year of Jubilee and Remission, in the Roman court, First Christian Jubilee. On February 22, 1300, Boniface published the bull Antiquorum Herbet Fide Relatia, in which, appealing vaguely the precedent of past ages, he declares that he grants afresh and renews certain great remissions and indulgences for sins which are to be obtained by visiting the city of Rome and the venerable Basilica of the Prince of the Apostles. Coming to more precise detail, he specifies that he concedes not only full and copious, but the most full pardon of all their sins to those who fulfill certain conditions. These are, first, that being truly penitent they confess their sins, and secondly, that they visit the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul in Rome, at least once a day for a specified time, in the case of the inhabitants of the city for 30 days, in the case of strangers for 15. No explicit mention is made of communion as a requirement to receive the indulgence, nor does the word jubilee occur in the bull. Indeed, the Pope speaks rather of a celebration which is to occur every 100 years, but writers both Roman and foreign describe this year as Annus Jubileus, and the name Jubilee has been applied to such celebrations ever since. Dante, who was himself supposed by some to have visited Rome during this year to gain the Jubilee indulgence, refers to it under the name Jubileo in the Inferno and indirectly bears witness to the enormous concourse of pilgrims by comparing the sinners passing along one of the bridges of Malibolgia in opposite directions to the throngs crossing the bridge of the Castel Sant'Angelo on their way to and from St. Peter's. Similarly, the chronicler Giovanni Villani was so impressed on this occasion by the sight of the monuments of Rome and the people who flocked thither that he then and there formed the resolution of his great chronicle, in the course of which he gives a remarkable account of what he witnessed. Other attendees may have included the artists Cimabue and Giotto, as well as Charles de Valois, the brother of the King of France. Villani describes the indulgence connected with this jubilee as a full and entire remission of all sins di culpari di pena, and he dwells upon the great contentment and good order of the people, despite the fact that during the greater part of that year there were 200,000 pilgrims on an average present in Rome over and above the ordinary population. With regard to the phrase just noticed, a culpare pena, which was often popularly used of the Jubilee and other similar indulgences, it should be observed that it means no more than what is now understood by a plenary indulgence. It implied, however, that any approved Roman confessor had faculties to absolve from reserved cases, and that the liberty thus virtually accorded of selecting a confessor was regarded as a privilege. The phrase was an unscientific one, and was not commonly used by theologians. It certainly did not mean, as some have pretended, that the indulgence of itself released from guilt as well as penalty. Guilt is actually remitted in the Catholic Church only in virtue of sacramental confession and the sorrow of the penitent. The sovereign pontiff never claimed any power of absolving in grievous matters apart from the sacrament. All theologians, remarks Maldonatus, unanimously without a single exception, replied that an indulgence is not a remission of guilt but of the penalty. Jubilee of 1350. Boniface VIII had intended that the Jubilee should be celebrated only once in 100 years. Before the middle of the 14th century, St. Birgitta of Sweden, and the poet Petrarch urged Pope Clement VI, then residing at Avignon, to celebrate a jubilee sooner. In 1343, Clement VI assented, and in 1350 a jubilee was held. Although the Pope did not return to Rome, Cardinal Gaetano Ceccano was dispatched to represent him. On this occasion daily visits to the Basilica di San Giovanni in Laterano were enjoined, besides those to the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul outside the walls, while at the next Jubilee, in 1390, the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore was added to the list. The visit to these four churches has remained as one of the conditions for gaining the Roman Jubilee indulgence. Jubilees are 1390 and 1423. The celebration next following was held in 1390, and in virtue of an ordinance of Pope Urban VI, it was proposed to hold a jubilee every 33 years as representing the period of the sojourn of Christ upon earth and also the average span of human life. In 1400, so many people came to Rome that Pope Boniface IX granted the indulgence again, even though he had not decreed a jubilee year previously. Another jubilee was proclaimed by Pope Martin V in 1423, but Pope Nicholas V, in 1450, reverted to the quinquagesimal period, while in 1470 Pope Paul II decreed that the jubilee should be celebrated every 25 years, and this has been the normal rule ever since. Paul also permitted foreigners to visit some specified church in their own country, and contribute towards the expense of the Holy Wars, as a substitute for the pilgrimage to Rome. Subsequent Jubilees. The Jubilees of 1450 and 1475 were attended by vast crowds of pilgrims, and that of 1450 was unfortunately made famous by a terrible accident in which nearly 200 persons were trampled to death in a panic which occurred on the bridge of Sant' Angelo. But even this disaster had its good effects in the pains taken afterwards to widen the thoroughfares and to provide for the entertainment and comfort of the pilgrims by numerous charitable organizations, of which the Archconfraternity of the Holy Trinity, founded by Saint Philip Neri, was the most famous. In 1500, Pope Alexander VI announced that the doors in the four major basilicas would be opened simultaneously, and that he himself would open the Holy Door of St. Peter's. The celebrations around this were founded on ancient rites and full of symbolic meaning, and the total number attending the initial Jubilee events was, according to Johann Burchard, an estimated 200,000 people. This act definitively ushered in several customs. The ninth Jubilee was solemnly opened on December 24, 1524 by Pope Clement VII. At a time when there were already symptoms of the great crises which would soon tear the Church apart, with the Protestant Reformation. The 1550 Jubilee was proclaimed by Paul III, but it was Pope Julius III who actually opened it. It is recorded that in 1575, in the time of Pope Gregory XIII, as many as 300,000 people came to Rome from all over Europe. The following Holy Year was proclaimed by Pope Clement VIII in 1600. In 1625, Urban VIII opened the ceremonial doors for the Jubilee year. However, the number of pilgrims was lower than expected due to the wars in northern Italy, and so the Pope suspended the declaration of indulgences outside Rome in an attempt to lure the faithful to the city. He then went on to declare a universal or extraordinary jubilee in 1628 to pray for peace. This was repeated the next year in 1629 and brought undoubted material benefits to the city. Finally, Innocent X oversaw the last of his jubilees in 1650. Clement X presided over that of 1675, while Clement XI, who opened the Jubilee of the year 1700, is remembered especially for establishing one of Rome's most renowned charitable institutions, the Hospice St. Michele a Reaper. Gradually other similar institutions were opened to offer shelter and assistance to pilgrims, as in the year 1725, the Holy Year called by Benedict XIII, a famous preacher during the Jubilee 1750, proclaimed by Benedict XIV, was Saint Leonardo da Porto Maurizio, the Apostle of the Via Crucis, who set up 14 stations of the cross inside the ruins of the Colosseum. Clement XIV announced the Jubilee of the year 1775 but died 3 months before Christmas, and the Holy Door was opened by the new Pope, Pius VI. The difficult situation in which the Church found herself during the hegemonic rule of Napoleon prevented Pius VII from proclaiming the Jubilee of 1800. More than 500,000 pilgrims made the journey to Rome for the Jubilee of 1825. 25 years later, the Holy Year could not be held because of the unsettled situation in the Roman Republic and temporary exile of Pius IX. However, he was able to announce a jubilee for 1875, but it was celebrated without any external solemnity, with only the clergy present for the inauguration. The holy doors were not opened, and the pilgrims who came were generally in Rome to do homage to the Pope, who had not accepted the Italian annexation of Rome by the troops of King Victor Emmanuel, rather than to obtain an indulgence. The Jubilee of 1900, though shorn of much of its splendor by the self-confinement of the Pope within the limits of the Vatican, was, nevertheless, carried out by Pope Leo XIII with all the solemnity that was possible. In the 20th century, Jubilees were held in 1925, 1933, 1950, 1966, 1975, 1983 and 2000. Pope Pius XII used the occasion of the 1950 Jubilee to declare a new national anthem for the Vatican City. On 13 March 2015, Pope Francis announced a special Jubilee on the theme of mercy to be held from 8 December 2015 until 20 November 2016, and formally convoked the Holy Year through the papal bull of Indiction, Misericordiae Vultus, on the 11th of April 2015. Great Jubilee of 2000. Pope John Paul II announced a Great Jubilee for the year 2000 with his apostolic letter Tertia Millennio Advenientur of November 10, 1994. In this writing, he called for a 3-year preparation period leading up to the opening of the Great Jubilee in December 1999. The first year, 1997, was to be dedicated to meditation on Jesus, the second to the Holy Spirit, and the third to God the Father. This Jubilee was especially marked by a simplification of the rites and the requirements for achieving the indulgence, as well as a huge effort to involve more Christians in the celebration. Protestant churches and the Orthodox were invited to celebrate the Jubilee together with the Catholics as a sign of ecumenical dialogue. Furthermore, special jubilees were invoked for various groups within the Church, such as children, athletes, politicians, and actors. World Youth Day, celebrated in Rome in August, brought over 2 million young people together. The Jubilee was closed by the Pope on January 6, 2001, by the closing of the Holy Door of St. Peter's and the promulgation of the Apostolic Letter Novo Millennio Inter, which outlined the Pope's vision for the future of the Church. Ceremonial of the Jubilee. The most distinctive feature in the ceremonial of the Jubilee is the unwalling and the final walling up of the Holy Door, in each of the 4 great basilicas which the pilgrims are required to visit. The doors are opened by the Pope at the beginning of the Jubilee and then sealed up again afterwards. Previously, the rite included the use of a silver hammer and a silver trowel. The Pope would pound on the wall, which would then be set to collapse. This ritual caused injury of bystanders, so for the Great Jubilee of 2000, Pope John Paul II simplified the rite considerably, opening and closing the doors with his hands. Traditionally, the Pope himself opens and closes the doors of St. Peter's Basilica personally, and designates a cardinal to open those of St. John Lateran, St. Mary Major, and St. Paul outside the walls. In the Great Jubilee, the Pope chose to open all the doors personally, while designating cardinals to close all the doors except that of St. Peter's. Catholic parishes all over the world share a similar right, dedicating a door for the purposes of the Jubilee year in order to accommodate its parishioners who do not intend to visit Rome for the occasion. Local parishes' doors include the same indulgence given to the basilica doors. Miscellaneous Jubilee events. Inspired popes can include whatever seems fitting, such as Jubilee pilgrimages. Thus the ever-world-traveling Pope John Paul II named some of his voyages Jubilee pilgrimages to the Holy Land in 2001, and a Jubilee pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Paul in 2001 to Malta, Syria and Greece.